and Italy was condemned across the world. In the League of Nations, Britain led a futile attempt to restrain Mussolini by imposing limited sanctions.
Action must now be taken. It is for the members of the League of Nations collectively to determine what their reaction should be.
All but 4 member nations voted for sanctions. Nobody wanted collective military action to force Italy to withdraw.
In such action.
The sanctions were painful, but all the League accomplished was to consolidate Italian support for the war.
Gli italiani si sentirono profondamente offesi.
The Italians were deeply hurt and considered the sanctions a clear injustice and an obstacle in their rebuilding program.
Ed un ostacolo all'opera della loro ricostruzione. Mussolini aveva avvertito Inghilterra e Francia.
Mussolini had warned England and France of his plans in Ethiopia and had not been opposed. Instead, they later imposed sanctions.
Invece più tardi vennero le sanzioni.
The party launched a battle to beat sanctions. Following the example of the Queen, 250,000 Roman matrons handed in their golden wedding rings to swell the national reserves of bullion. Their husbands donated bedsteads to the cause, anything of metal, anything at all to feed the Duce's war machine. What Italians did not know was that the war and the collapse of Italy's foreign trade was wrecking the economic revival of the 20s. With victory in April 1936, there was blind rejoicing from the king and the pope to the crowds in the streets. Alone against the world, Italians had proved themselves as a nation of warriors. Rome was again the capital of an empire, and its creator Mussolini was admired and applauded as never before.
Si esprime in questa semplice, irrevocabile, definitiva proposizione: l'Etiopia è italiana!
Mussolini had brought fascism to its peak. It would be several years before the Italians began to count the cost of his ambitions. With Ethiopia, Italy had lost valued friends, and from now on fascism was to go into gradual decline. Mussolini's addiction to war now drove Italians into a second expensive adventure: the intervention of 50,000 troops in the civil war in Spain. In battle, his army did not distinguish itself, and at home, the official newsreels failed completely to arouse enthusiasm.
Le salmerie legionarie entrano in Casteldans, occupata con felice colpo di mano alle 3 di notte del 4 gennaio dai caristi legionari. La cittadina ci appare completamente devastata negli edifici, ingombra nelle vie e nelle piazze dagli sbarramenti di pietra con i quali i rossi hanno invano tentato di arginare l'impeto dei carri legionari.
Mussolini later admitted that 2 wars had bled Italy white. The diplomatic consequences were even greater. The Ethiopian War had taken Italy out of the Western camp, and Spain was drawing her closer to Nazi Germany. What drew the 2 dictators together was only partly ideology. Each needed the other. Hitler had taken advantage of the commotion over Ethiopia to reoccupy the Rhineland. Mussolini, impressed by this show of force, saw Hitler as an ally he could influence.
I think that it was the fact that Germany for him meant a young country in a position of ascension, if you can say that. And because of that, he had better be with them than to be with the countries that he was considering somewhat decadent. That is the reason why I think he forced himself, I say forced himself, to ally himself with the Germans, because fundamentally I think that Mussolini was not a lover of Germany or a lover of Germans, but he felt that he could not avoid being ally of the Germans because of the power which was coming out of the German people.
In November 1936, Hitler and Mussolini formed what they called the Rome-Berlin Axis. It was a turning point in Italian history. Mussolini would lose control of his own foreign policy, and Italy would become a German satellite. The fascists now began to imitate the Nazis. Mussolini ordered his army to adopt the German goose step. He called it the Passo Romano. The soldiers did their best to conform. But what shocked even hardened fascists was the Duce's imposition of anti-Semitism in a set of laws discriminating against the Jews.
Ho sempre pensato che quello fu un errore.
I've always thought they were a mistake. Mussolini introduced the anti-Semitic laws because he was in a way obliged to by his alliance with Hitler. Our people, however, have never been racist. I was born in the Italian city of Ferrara, where the burgomaster has always been a Jew, Renzo Ravenna. A lot of the founders of the fasci di combattimento between 1919 and 1921 in many Italian cities were Jewish. Hatred was never felt nor displayed against the Jews. In Italy, they were never persecuted as they were in Germany.
The new relationship was put to the test when Germany invaded Austria in 1938. Only 4 years earlier, Mussolini had blocked this ambition of Hitler by sending troops into the Brenner Pass. But Germany was now a major military power. Mussolini earned Hitler's undying gratitude by condoning the invasion in advance. After the Anschluss, Hitler was perfectly placed to threaten his next objective, Czechoslovakia. In the autumn of 1938, Europe was on the brink of war. The Munich Conference of September 1938 gave Mussolini a final opportunity to play a role on the European stage. By relaying to Hitler the British request for a last-minute meeting, and by presenting as his own a settlement drafted by the Germans, he was able to pose as a saviour of world peace. In reality, he was an extra. The decisions at Munich were made by Neville Chamberlain and by Hitler. Later, Mussolini would recall with pride how Chamberlain had licked his boots. Mussolini returned to Italy to frenzied shouts of Duce.
I sentimenti di riconoscenza e di orgoglio della nazione per l'uomo che ha salvato l'Europa dal baratro di una guerra assurda si manifesteranno con un susseguirsi di commoventi episodi di amore e di devozione lungo tutto il viaggio trionfale.
For the first time, Mussolini was acclaimed as a peacemaker. In January 1939, the hope that Mussolini would side with Britain and France brought the British Prime Minister on a mission to Rome.
Mussolini had first proposed a general settlement to the British on the 5th of October 1935. This general settlement guaranteed Italy's cooperation in Europe against Germany. In return, Britain was to give Italy equal rights in the Mediterranean and a share in the sphere of influence in North Africa and the Middle East. Mussolini continued to put forward this proposal to the British right up to the outbreak of war in Europe and even during Italy's period of neutrality.
Chamberlain wanted to detach Mussolini from Hitler, but Mussolini's price was too high. 4 months later, Mussolini's foreign minister, Count Ciano, arrived in Berlin to sign a full-scale military alliance with Hitler. The German occupation of Prague 2 months earlier had caught Mussolini unawares. Briefly, he had considered switching to the side of Britain and France, but it made more sense to stay with the stronger side. During the discussions, Ciano had stressed that Italy would not